Hey, what's up, YouTube? It's Logan, the drunken metalhead who muses, and tonight I'm getting a little extra nerdy with you. I want to talk about uh, a potential favorite topic of mine, and probably a favorite topic of a lot of metalheads, a subgenre or a mini genre. I really do think a lot of our favorite things to do as metalheads is to really dive deep into categorizing and just putting descriptors on the various types of bands that are out there. Honestly, this is at odds with what bands want to do. I feel like bands want to try to be as unique as possible and to try to be as distinctive as possible for the most part. At least a lot of bands that I admire. But then us as metal fans, we want to lump them into categories and kind of separate everything out into a tree, if you will, which almost goes entirely against what a band wants. So it's funny that we're almost working at odds with these bands, you know? But I can't help it. I'm a metalhead, and I think I suffer a sickness that a lot of you also suffer through. So I can't help but love labeling and describing bands whose main goal is to be unclassifiable. So with that in mind, here I am to make the case for a mini subgenre that I am currently coining as death sludge. So before I dive any further, I want to get a beer, and a genre I'm going to describe as death sludge deserves a beer like this. Fucking Wake Up Dead. Of course, inspired by Megadeth's song. This is a Imperial Stout from Left Hand Brewing Company out in Longmont, Colorado. And yeah, it's a Imperial Stout. It's almost 9%. It's heavy. It's dark. Looks like oil, drinks like oil, and is very befitting of a genre or mini genre such as death sludge. So cheers. Alright, so let me now try to define this genre of music. So to me, it's a blending of sludge metal riffage at like the slowest, doomiest level, which prides itself on being atonal at the same time. So we're not talking about like bluesy riffage or riffs that are drenched in melody. This is very much like sharp, almost hardcore style riffage. And then the vocals themselves are harsh and just really raspy and extreme. And the atmosphere overall behind it. So every other instrument is trying its best to be as loud and to take as much space up as possible. I mean, this can include elements of black metal and industrial along with death metal too. But at the very end of the day, the main purpose is to be slow, crushing, and just noisy. Essentially, it's just doom being approached from an extreme metal spot, but almost at like a hardcore starting point. You know? Like you started in hardcore and now you're trying to play funeral doom, kind of. That's what I think when I think of this mini genre. To me, not too many bands exist in this. I think the thin line, if you will, kind of it's drawn between, on one end, you get a little too drony, a little too long and drawn out and like atmospheric. And then on the other end, you get a little bit too more hardcore oriented, or sludge oriented, and you end up being like I Hate God or something. And then on the other side of things, if you have a little too much death metal in there, then you're no different than like a death doom band. So there's definitely a couple bands that really fit into this. And also I have to add that the certain feel and vibe of the music is important too. It feels very self-destructive from like a sludge metal perspective, you know, like a perspective of substance abuse. But then at the same time it has the depressive down points of like the toughest doom metal. Let's dive into Death Sludge. But first, I've also toyed around with some other names or heard some other names from other places bandied about for this mini genre. I've heard Extreme Sludge, Blackened Sludge, or even Toxic Sludge mentioned for the bands I'm going to talk about. So, I don't know. Honestly, I think Extreme Sludge Metal might fit the best. So to me, this idea is kind of stemming from Banger TV, you know, with their Lock Horns episodes where they kind of like make the cases and argue about different subgenres and stuff. And with that in mind, they talk about proto bands. So to me, the proto bands for this mini genre would be I Hate God and Dystopia. I think both of those directly contribute to the musicality and just the overall mindset going into this music. And then from there, they kind of dive right into the Godfather, or like the starting point of the music. And this is from my perspective for sure. So I'm sure someone else might have a different band or different album chosen, but for me, Death Sludge or Extreme Sludge Metal starts with this band and this album right here, Come to Grief by Grief. So, yeah, this was released in 1994. I don't think I could imagine hearing this album back in 1994. This shit is fucking slow, like funeral doom slow, but then it's just so abrasive, and it's like hardcore slowed down to a quarter speed. This is, to me, definitely the origin point. There's like only a couple fast parts. Track 4, I Hate You, is the highlight because that's when it actually speeds up. The opening track, Earthworm, is probably the best snapshot of this album because it's just slow and menacing, and the vocals are just raspy and guttural. But yeah, I don't know. To me, Grief kind of started it all for this, and Come to Grief is front and center example. And I'm glad that this band is continuing to do what they're doing under the moniker of Come to Grief. So please check that out as well if you can. And then from there, at least the extreme sludge music that I'm talking about didn't really start to spawn for almost an extra decade to a decade and a half. And it really didn't start to pop up in the way that I'm thinking of it until 2009. And maybe this is just because I didn't really get into metal until 2009, 2010, so I could be missing certain high watermarks of this mini genre, if you will. But from where I'm looking at, 2009, a certain album popped up that repopularized it by a certain band, and I am talking about Hatred for Mankind by Dragged into Sunlight. And this is just pure murder metal. Holy shit, this stuff is savage. And it's uncomfortable. It's an uncomfortable album. It's essentially blackened death metal with sludge metal undertones, all thrown over a doom skeleton. I mean, it's essentially every extreme metal subgenre thrown into one, and it's impressive. And it's worthy of all the accolades that it gets and it doesn't get. Honestly, I still think it's an underrated album. But I think because of this, that's why we're having this conversation in the first place. Because of this album. And this was the first of this mini genre that I heard. I don't know. For me, you can't deny the opening punch of Boiled Angel with Buried with Leeches. That has the most intense metal moment I think I've ever heard of any song, which still sounds catchy. It's crazy. And then Volcanic Birth has an insane riff. Oh my god. Lashed to the Grinder and Stoned to Death is just menacing. I love this album. And I briefly want to mention the follow-up, Widowmaker, which I think was originally disliked, but it's still a good album. It just shows a different element of the band, which leans a bit more towards the sludge and almost post-metal side of their sound. And I don't know, it does a nice job. Like, this is one of those tough albums I feel like it would be hard to follow up unless you did something like this. Alright, and now, probably to talk about my favorite band of the whole bunch, Lord Mantis from Chicago, Illinois. And I discovered these guys with their album off of Profound Lore, Death Mask. And this came out back in 2014. And man, this stuff is just fucked up. I mean, look at that album cover. Here, I'll just go and just save everybody from that. Lord Mantis is extreme on many different levels. I think in inclusion with the like death metal, blackened sludge, doom, there's a little bit of industrial in here as well in their sound, especially just in how the production is and how the riffs are a bit more repetitive than maybe other albums. So this is their 2012 album, Perverter. This is their second LP, but I think this is really when they perfect their sound and just really hit a home run for me. Like this one and the follow-up, Death Mask, which I'll talk about in a second, are at least 9 out of 10 albums. I mean, they're both killer. They're just chock full of these menacing riffs that just want you to pulverize your neck and hate yourself at the same time. They're awesome. I mean, off of this album, Septichrist, track 2, Lavia, track 4, that might be my favorite song. It's got like the slowest, most palm-muted riff ever. It's probably my favorite moment in Lord Mantis's whole discography. And then you can't go wrong with Ritual Killer and the closing song, The Whip and the Body. And then here on Death Mask, holy shit. Body Joke and Death Mask are both some of my favorite songs by this band, and just visceral to a soul-crushing degree. Like, this shit gets into your skin in the same way that, like, Downward Spiral by Nine Inch Nails kind of gets into your skin and just makes you hate yourself. It's insane. Negative Birth is just fucking crushing, and then the final song, Three Crosses, is fairly cathartic and almost beautiful in execution. But I don't know, this might be one of the most unique sounding bands that I'm talking about tonight. I really recommend Lord Mantis. This really might be my favorite releases. And then if you're looking for something else outside of Lord Mantis, the vocalist Charlie Fell did vocals for the latest Cobalt album, Slow Forever, and it's definitely different and distinct from Lord Mantis, but then at the same time, it scratches a similar itch. And then from there, we're going to a band whose main goal I can only describe as musical carpet bombing. It's intense, and it doesn't give a shit about anything. And I'm talking about Indian. And this is really where the noise element and like the hardcore element really ramps up the most. I sadly only have one album from them. This is From All Purity. I've also heard The Unquiet Sky and Guiltless, and highly recommend both of those albums. But yeah, From All Purity is my favorite so far that I've listened to. It is, I think, the most intense. Like, it's unforgiving. For example, track 1 is simply entitled Rape. I mean, fuck. And then my favorite song is track 4, Rhetoric of No. It's probably got the most intense like noise elements to it, and it's just got this like ringing, pinging noise that just gets gradually louder and louder and louder, and it makes you think you're going crazy, but it's just part of the music. And the final track, Disambiguation, is killer too. But yeah, gotta mention Indian. It features Will Lindsay, who was a part of Wolves in the Throne Room for an album or two, and even part of Mike Scheidt from Yob. It was his band Midian. He played on that album as well. So, highly recommend Indian. For really the actual people who coined the term death sludge, we've got Primitive Man. And to me, this is their ultimate magnum opus, Scorn. Somewhere between death metal and I Hate God is where this band pops up. And then, I mean, even at parts, Sun, maybe, or like some more like harsh noise elements. It's hard to listen to. It's not fun to listen to. I mean, none of this music is fun to listen to, but this is the least fun of the bunch, and they want it to be like that. But yeah, no, Scorn, the title track is just really, it's the magnum opus for this band. It features the funeral doom side paired right along with like that almost disembowelment, full-on death metal grindy side of their sound. And then it's got Rags, which is just a ripping song, and Black Smoke, which is the more ambient, harsh noise element of it. And then I also have to mention I've got like this recent EP, Insurmountable, same thing, just in a more concise like 35-minute package. Also, it features a cover of Smashing Pumpkins' Quiet. Could you tell it was them? No. Sounds like Primitive Man. The final band I want to talk about is actually what's going on in the background. It's a favorite of mine, and now kind of a local favorite, out of Baton Rouge and New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm talking about Thou. So it doesn't have their logo on either of these releases, but they're a bit more all over the place in their sound, and not maybe as immediately extreme as some of the other bands I mentioned. But Thou are fucking awesome. They're versatile, they're prolific, they don't hold back. We're jamming to their album Heathen, and this is my introduction to them. And it might be my favorite of their normal full lengths, truthfully. It's just a bit more post-metal oriented, but still harsh as fuck. So, you gotta love Heathen. I also have to highlight their album Summit, which came out before Heathen. It's even a bit more streamlined, but then the post-metal's stripped back a little bit more, and I think it's a bit sludgier in execution and a bit heavier, not as long and drawn out. This is like a 45-minute album. This is like an hour and 10-minute long album. So take your pick, I guess. And then just because I got it and want to show it off, here is my vinyl edition of Heathen. They always do like these different variants for their vinyl records. And I actually really like this Victorian style one that they have. So, God, I don't know. I love this band, Thou. They're one of my favorites, period. And as I said, they're really still prolifically releasing music. They've done a killer collaboration within the past year or two with Emma Ruth Rundle, and even a collaboration with Mizmor recently, which is more extreme than their usual sound, but still good. And I'm just excited to see what they come out with next. So there you go. That's my attempt at establishing a little family tree for Extreme Sludge, Death Sludge, Toxic Sludge, whatever the fuck you want to call it. Here are some bands that I feel like fit, but that I don't own and still want to mention. For like some classic bands, Corrupted and Newthrush came out within similar times to Grief, but then also I want to add Hell and Coffin Worm as some bands from like that late 2000s, early 2010s sound. And then there's new bands that are taking up the mantle for this style of music and really championing it as their own. My favorite of these are Chained to the Bottom of the Ocean. I love their latest album, Obsession Destruction, and their killer EP, Tell Me What You See Vanishing, and I Will Tell You Who You Are. But then also the band Body Void too, and they just released an album literally just this past Friday. And then one more band, Hellish Form, I literally recently discovered, but they still fit, and I recommend. So my final question for you is, are there any other bands of this style that I missed? What are they? Where do they fit into this mini genre? And are there any other like mini subgenres of metal that you would champion as your own? But anyway, cheers. Thanks for watching.